Thanks everyone for coming and making time this morning. And can I just welcome, we've got some people joining us online as well. They're joining us for the first hour. So it's just being aware that you're actually being viewed online as well. And we are recording. So just to make people aware of that. Okay, first things first, I'm Kate Brindley. I'm part of the team who's been working with the City Council to put together the cultural strategy for the city. So it's great to get to this stage where we've been leading a research and engagement process and holding a conversation across many different people and rooms over several months to get to what is a draft strategy stage, which is what we're here today to discuss, iterate and expand upon. So there's going to be some, you've got agendas on your table just to give you an outline of what we're going to do this morning for the next couple of hours. So there'll be a bit of presentation from the front, and then there'll be a Q&A, just answering anybody's questions about the process or anything that's arisen from the presentation. And then there'll be lots of opportunity for discussion and input. And there'll be a number of table-based discussions, so you'll be guided through that at the right moment. Can I just introduce a few of the cultural strategy team who are also in the room, who you're going to see a bit more of later. So Joe, I'm going to hand over to in a bit. Joe Chris. Tom, do you want to wave? Who's from 4th Street, who's been leading the production and the writing and research side of things. Ruth, I've lost you, Ruth. Oh, she's outside, just dealing with any latecomers. So Ruth's part of the team as well. And then can I just put your hands up for the table hosts who are around? So they'll also be, so Sarah, Joe, Linda, Ola. I can't see Kat. I'm going to be one, and then Tom's going to be one. And I think Sarah's going to be one. So we'll move into that section later. Okay, so the point of today is to really collectively digest where we've got to and to take feedback and to really bring us together to have a conversation about what is the next steps. So can I take a straw poll? Who's had a chance to read the strategy? Excellent, gold star. So, because it's quite a dense document, so you may have had time to skim it or digest it fully, or you've been reading it and reading it and reading it. All that is brilliant, and all that knowledge can come into the room, so that's fantastic. For those of you that haven't had a chance to read it, we're going to do a little recap. So, but obviously that won't give you the breadth and richness of it, so there'll be a chance for you to read it and submit comments. So the strategy, the draft has been live and available for about 7 days now. And till the end of the month, it's going to be available for people to comment. And we're encouraging people to use an online platform to do that, but we're also taking email submissions as well. So the strategy's very much been co-created by a huge amount of conversations. Joe's going to say a bit more about that in a moment. But it's really about celebrating where we are, but also, and very importantly, tracking a path forward for the amazing creative and cultural sector that we all are part of and want to celebrate and see thrive for the future. Now, many of you have been part of this process. So we've been hugely reliant on a huge amount of expertise from the city to get where we are. What we also acknowledge is the strategy is draft. So what you've seen is not how it's going to look when it finally gets to a final stage and publishing. So there's an opportunity for you to input today into how you want to see that appear. But that's all, this is very much a draft. So I hope you take it in that spirit, that we're sharing our workings with you. And that's the point of this session, is to iterate further and develop it. So we also acknowledge, and people have pointed this out to us already, is that there are gaps. So it's really important that those areas are flagged to us so that we can develop them further. Also, there may be areas that you are very much expert and passionate about and can help us fill in some of the areas that we've not perhaps captured in a way in which need to be captured. So that's a really important part of this process as well. So for instance, I'll give you an example of that. The whole area of children and young people and education isn't something that we feel has been captured enough in it. So we acknowledge that. That's already been flagged to us, and it's really important that is developed properly. So those of you who are working in that area, we want to continue to develop that. And there are other areas as well. I hope you recognise that this is quite a big task to try and capture a city's cultural ambitions in one document, and it's not easy to balance what is that strategic high-level rallying cry and to have something where people recognise what they're seeing, whilst giving a level of detail and specificity which is very much of the city. So we're trying to balance those two things, and so we need help in doing that. So the process following today and all the online consultation that we're doing will be then to refine to the next stage, and we'll say a little bit about that later. So enough from me, other than to show you what you're going to be here to do. So I'm going to hand over to Joe in a moment. It's going to say a little bit more about the process we've been to. Then Tom is going to come up and just give a real overview of the strategy, and that'll help those of you that have not had a chance to delve into it yet. A little bit of Q&A, there's a break, and then we'll be doing some discussion. So with no more from me, I'm going to hand over to Joe now, who's going to take over. Thank you very much.
Round of applause, why not? Thank you, Kate. So hi everyone, my name is Joe. I'm director at Opus Independents, if you haven't come across me or Opus before. I'm going to speak, that's right, Johnny, I'll just leave it here. I'm going to speak very briefly to the process that we've gone through creating the strategy. I'm aware that there's people in the room who have been interacting with the cultural strategy since its beginning, and I'm also aware, which is really great, that there are people coming into this room for the first time who haven't engaged with the process so far. So just very briefly going to outlay the process that we've done in partner and stakeholder engagement in creating the strategy. So approximately, we've engaged with about 1,000 different individuals and organisations through the process of developing the cultural strategy. And there's been more touch points than that as well. And when we talk about touch points, we mean people who filled in a digital survey. So we've already completed 2 of those, and we have a 3rd one up at the moment, which is capturing responses to the draft strategy itself. We've also run approximately 15 to 16 different in-person events, and these have included what we've called vision workshops, which have been taking place here in this room, actually, where we collected about 100 people each of those sessions, about asking people what they thought, what works, what didn't work, and what Sheffield's potential is as a creative city. We also ran specific engagement group workshops, which were taking up on specific areas for the culture sector, such as the climate crisis, or with children and young people. And we also run a huge number of sort of one-to-one interviews as well, which were sort of designed to fill specific gaps that were emerging in expertise or in knowledge through our other engagement platforms with the strategy. So we ran about 25 one-to-one interviews as well, with a huge different range of members and individuals, again, from the wider cultural and creative sector in the city. We've had a number of different consultants who've been involved in the delivery of the cultural strategy work. So myself and Opus have helped sort of coordinate that, but we've been aided and supported by what we were calling a sort of task and finish group, which we set up at the very beginning of the process, which was a kind of what we've been referring to as a diagonal slice of Sheffield's creative and cultural sector. So there are bigger institutions on our task and finish group, but there are also individual artists and members of smaller organisations as well. And for us, it was really important to have that balance of people who are across different parts of the cultural sector. So we also have people from the voluntary and community sector as part of that task and finish group as well. There are a few other individuals that have been involved in this. So Ruth Nutter has been an amazing creative producer who's helped plan and deliver parts of this process as well. And also Ola, who's one of our table hosts as well, who put her hand up earlier, and also Rachel Walton as well. And this all work has been supported by Arts Council England, Sheffield City Council, and the University of Sheffield. And obviously, throughout all of this sort of consultation process, we've heard a lot of information about some of the challenges in the sector. But I think it's also important to reflect that this is also a moment of opportunity in the city. Culture is a re-energised priority, I think, at the moment in Sheffield and South Yorkshire. And in an era when lots of councils are cutting funding for support for arts and culture, fortunately, Sheffield is revitalising its commitment to culture in the city. There are new job roles within the city, which hopefully some of you may be aware, some of you might not be aware, such as Sarah Sharp, who's recently joined Sheffield City Council within the New Arts team, and also Katie Ashton. In a recent sort of process that's been going on in the city called City Goals, a creative and entrepreneurial Sheffield, if I can pronounce it right, is the first city goal. So it's great to see other processes and consultation processes in the city seeing the value of creativity and culture. There's new funding sources that recently come online within the city, such as Creative Communities and the Cultural Pipeline Fund. And if you want more information about that, you can speak to Jo Wingate, who's also in the room. Just putting her hand up there, please do ask her about that. And obviously, there's lots of other developments and contexts happening in Sheffield at the moment as well, from the 470 million Heart of the City development, things like Harmony Works. We've got new national organisations relocating to the city as well from other places. There's a new major event strategy. There's a new destination management plan. And also, of course, we have a new government as well. So even though, we know they're not going to be writing any blank checks just as yet, we're hoping that context might change the context that we're all operating in as cultural and creative professionals. And I suppose briefly just to say that this is the start and not the end of the process. And just to reiterate what Kate said, that this part of this consultation the next month is a planned and essential part of our consultation process when we're planning the delivery of the cultural strategy. It's a draft, and as she said, we are aware that there are gaps, and we have a document already that has many pages of notes and corrections, everything from just corrections about individual artists to changing text around specific organisations. But also we've received information about the children and young people as an area that needs development, but there are also other areas as well, such as more of a focus on classical music, more of a focus on folk music. We're also developing a small section on accessibility and inclusivity as well. So there are lots of areas of development that are going alongside this process. Great. I think that is probably it from me. So I'm now going to hand over to Tom, who's going to give a brief presentation around the cultural strategy. Round of applause, please, for Tom.
Hopefully I can be heard all right. Good. And hopefully everybody online can hear me as well. Hello, everybody. Really good to have another opportunity to see you all and speak to you all. I'm Tom Agar, as Joe said, from 4th Street. We've been working on coordinating the whole strategy process, and in particular on the research side of things, but also then more recently on the drafting and getting us to where we're at on Have Your Say. There's a lot in the strategy, as other people have said, and I'm not going to try and summarize 100 pages in 10 minutes, but it's great to see that you guys have really engaged, and everybody's or nearly everybody has read and dove in. So really excited to hear your feedback and thoughts. just to sort of get our minds and juices flowing again a little bit, I was going to remind us of two main parts of the strategy, which is the kind of overarching creative missions and the delivery plan that sits underneath that. I mean, we've said a lot of these things before. The strategy is in draft, so now is the opportunity to kind of feed in and make some changes, and we're really open and excited to do that with you guys. I'm not going to go over engagement again because Joe's talked about it and described what we've done. But alongside that engagement, there's been a lot of research that has been completed as well. Some of you who've been involved for longer in the process may have seen a cultural audit document that was shared at the beginning of the year. That feels like a long time ago now, but that was a sort of baseline of a wide range of economic, social, kind of political research that's all gone into understanding mainly where we're at the moment, where the sector is, and some of the challenges it faces. And that really helped us going into the engagement process as well. And as Joe said, we've also had a lot of guidance and help from a range of different groups, including our Task and Finish group, but also some of the wider stakeholders as well. So Arts Council England, for example, as well as the mayoral combined authority on the regional level, which hopefully is going to become even more important as devolution begins to happen more and more. But I'll keep moving through. Worth saying there's quite a bit to do. Joe's mentioned some gaps, but there's also some things we knew were not complete even before we released this draft that we know need to happen in the coming weeks. One thing is the design of the document. It's not going to sort of physically look like it does now. We didn't really put loads and loads of effort into that yet because we wanted to get the content right first. And that also connects into how this is presented. You know, at the moment, it's more than 100 pages. It's very dense. We need to think about the forms in which this can be released. So are there short form versions that are very punchy, that are, you know, more public documents? Is there some sort of investment prospectus that's kind of focused towards funders? Is there a more detailed annex kind of thing that those people who are really interested can access? So these are all things we'd like to get your thoughts on as well, and we haven't resolved fully. So that, yeah, look and feel and all of that is going to change. Another thing that we are in the process of thinking about is what we're calling collective leadership. So in terms of how we build on the engagement work that's happened and rooms like this filled with really engaged creatives, how do we move that forward into kind of the way that we manage and lead the sector in the future? You know, there's a lot of recognition in the strategy that maybe some of the current organizations and networks are not as open, for example, as they might be, and people don't know how they can get involved with decision making and things. So how do we stimulate that and move forward and collectively lead from across the sector? That's a question that, again, we haven't fully answered, but we're looking at and would love to get your thoughts on. And other specific things, case studies, for example. Those of you with eagle eyes will have noticed that we were talking about case studies, and then there weren't any case studies in the draft strategy. That was an intentional decision, but we'd really like to get your thoughts on which case studies might be involved and included to really reflect the diversity and exciting nature of the strategy. Lost my label. And it's been a long process, and over that process, things have happened. So new strategic documentation has appeared, as Joe said, new government, which has led to growth plan and things. So there are new elements of strategy that we need to make sure we include as well as more detail on things like funding in particular and how this connects to funding opportunities moving forward. So the creative missions, then, just to remind you of kind of what this, you know, that this is a major main part of the first part of the strategy in terms of the North Star of where we want to go in the future. And there's a sort of identity statement that kicks us off about how culture and creativity is really within the DNA of Sheffield's people, not just within the creative sectors as well. It goes, I think, far beyond that into a range of other sectors around the city. But we know the city is also a place of radical change, making and innovation is a part of the history, but also today in what the city does. A whole range of different cultural art forms and things that have been that are really thriving and not necessarily reflected in sort of the national consciousness as much as they should be. But lots of sorry. It's quite hard to actually read this in person. I didn't want to read it all out. We know the city is very international and increasingly international, but also proudly northern as well. And how do we reflect that in the strategy? We're a city of sanctuary and welcoming to new people, and we nurture and provide a home to everybody. And I think what we need to also recognize is the balance between the really strong grassroots creative sector that we've got, but also the world stage, national profile, international profile activity that's already happening. We've got both of those things. That's quite unusual. Not everywhere has that. And that creates some challenges, but also some really exciting opportunities as well of how we can actually grow some of that grassroots activity more and more. So there'll be plenty of time for reflection on this, but just to remind you of where the creative missions come out of that. And what we've tried to do is balance some of those scale elements. So, we've got the big stuff in here, hopefully the ambition that we want to really put Sheffield's culture on the international stage, recognized for what it is. But at the same time, a huge number of organizations facing some challenges in many cases, not as big and impactful as they want to be, perhaps because of funding or other reasons. How do we accelerate growth at the sector organization level as well? So kind of got those two elements are always in our minds about the big stuff shouting about Sheffield on the global stage, but then also sector-based work as well. The third mission is all around recognition and shining a light on what already happens, the great work that's here, and growing that and connecting it, supporting communities to grow their own cultural activities and things. And the last one is around the foundations for culture to thrive. And that relates to things like the collective leadership question that we were talking about, but also just getting the basics right. Do we have spaces that people can actually create in? Are they affordable? Are they accessible? Do people know where they are? Can they connect into networks? All that sort of stuff that sounds very simple, but is actually probably the hardest part to get right. As I said, there's a huge amount of detail in here, and we can have some of these slides up as we kind of go through a Q&A. There's a little bit more detail here. As I said, this section is all around the bigger stuff, so building on areas where we know the city has already a really strong reputation internationally. Events and festivals that kind of reflect that. Again, the city is renowned for its strong events and festivals program. But also then in terms of what that means for things like tourism, the visitor economy, this is culture has the potential to be the window into Sheffield. It's the way that we can talk about the city and bring people in. So we need to make sure that we're doing that right, all the while kind of balancing to make sure the benefits of this are inclusive and don't kind of impact only on certain areas of the sector, but are really fair and have the environment in mind as well. Second one is all about driving forward the sector, but in the right way. So again, social environmental impact is really important and something I know everybody's thinking about and working around. Creative health is a really important part of this. And again, Sheffield has quite a unique strength in this area. There are other cities that are working on this, but Sheffield's strong, and kind of the links with broader community organizations and things, powerful thing to build on, and then kind of a community first approach to all of this, getting that right. But there's also the question, and I know Kate mentioned, around building on this, around access, cultivating talent, and young people, how we get more and more young people to see there's a future in the creative sector in the city. Recognition, value, and connecting culture. So this is thinking about how the things that are happening within our communities are supported in the right way, and that the diversity of the offer and the creatives in the city is recognized and valued. Their heritage and intangible heritage stories are told and reflected and represented in the different spaces and forums in the city. Because I think one of the things that's very clear, we do understand, and the sector agrees, that there's immense power for change and for bringing people together through culture and creativity. So there's an enormous amount of social good we can do through this in the various parts of the city. Yeah, we need all parts of the city to have access to what they need to do that, because it's not necessarily the case at the moment. And the final one is foundations. So the key thing here is that organizations, artists, individuals have what they need to, grow, develop in the way that they want to. Things like spaces are key to that, but also talent and skill sets. Do we have the right sorts of skill sets to do everything we want in the city, to really prosper and thrive? And also connected in this is the leadership, or the collective leadership model, which we know we want to put in place, which we can talk about a bit more, I'm sure, in the Q&A. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of the mission plan, of the creative missions. Underneath that kind of North Star for where we want to go is what we're calling the delivery plan. This is where it gets a bit more crunchy. So it's all about more specific actions for things we know we want to do. Some of them are quite short-term things that can happen fairly quickly. Others are big, lofty, quite difficult nuts to crack, but they're all things we want to do. There's a huge amount of detail in here. For those of you who got to the end, you'll have seen the tables that kind of list out around, I think, 26 different action areas. And there will probably be, there'll be quite a lot of change needed to these. So really keen where you've got, subject-specific expertise and you think this is wrong or this needs refining. This is a really good opportunity to talk us through those changes. One thing I would say is that any good delivery plan also needs to be dynamic and sort of iterative. So we can set out and agree some things we know we want to do today. In a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, that list will need to change a bit because life changes, and all sorts of things will come along. New opportunities may come along as well. And so part of our thinking here is, how do we make sure the delivery plan is owned by the sector and the right people, that collective leadership model, to be able to respond to things, and to keep a delivery plan that's actually live, that doesn't just go onto a shelf and gather dust and quickly becomes out of date. We need this to be a changing thing as well that responds. It is organized around the creative missions, and kind of aims to deliver those 4 key aims. And obviously it's built on the research and engagement that we've done. I think there's a lot of detail in this, and maybe it's quite difficult to read, but hopefully you can. You'll be happy to know I'm not going to go through this, but I will leave this up because I think this is something we really want to get our teeth into as we talk through both the kind of Q&A that happens now, but also the roundtables. This looks detailed, but there's a lot more detail underneath each of these areas as well. And yeah, really keen to get everybody's thoughts around, are we on the right track? Have we missed key actions? Can some of these actions be developed and changed, using your knowledge? Really excited to hear your thoughts on that. I think I'm going to stop there because I spoke for too long. Yeah, we're all ears, basically. John.
Just before we go into the Q&A, I'm just going to give a brief moment to Sarah to introduce yourself, if that's all right, to the team.
Hi everyone. I was really tempted to just get off the stage then. Hi, I'm Sarah Sharp. I am the new service manager for culture at Sheffield City Council. I've been in post for about a month now, and it's a really exciting time to join. There's been so much happening with this cultural strategy, and I'm really excited that we're all here today to look towards the future of what culture can be in Sheffield and celebrate what it already is as well. So I hope that as we go into this Q&A, everyone can bring their kind of ideas, their thoughts about how we build this all together collectively, because it's going to take all of us to do this. So great to meet you all, and I'll pass back to the team. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. If you wanted to stay up at the front as well, Sarah, for the Q&A, because myself, you and Tom will help answer some of the questions, if that's all right. Just a brief note on the Q&A, if we could keep sort of questions and comments to maybe a couple of minutes, just to make sure we can hear from as many different voices in the room, that would be lovely. And we're going to be handing around some mics, because obviously we're online as well, to make sure that people online can hear the questions as well. So yeah, we'll start off with some questions.
Yeah. Are we lifting hands so that at least I can see?
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, Tom and Kate. Thank you for introducing this today, and phenomenal the progress that's happened with this work. I'm sure everyone in the room is really sort of excited about where we can go. I just wanted to feedback an immediate sort of on reading sense of this, that there's three things really. The pace of the document feels like it shifts from aspiration into delivery in a kind of, there's a little bit of a breakneck thing that happens that I think I can go into a little bit. So where we're in the aspiration on creativity in our DNA, the dream big sort of aspects and the sense of a cross-disciplinary sort of multi-art form, everybody involved aspect is there. But then with this delivery plan that we've got up here on point ones to 5, just really quickly breaks down into art forms. So at some point, a decision has been made to kind of, which ends up being really siloed. And the risk with that is when you go to delivery a bit down the line, these art forms that are identified, visual arts, music, performing arts, that are siphoned off at this point, will also act as a barrier to other activity, you know, just naturally, because it's not on the list. And then again, on points 1 to 5, so the top one there, establish stronger mechanisms for platforming culture. Further in the document, in the risk matrix, it's listed that there are no risks with this, but that can't be the case, because if there was no risks, we'd already have really strong mechanisms for platforming culture. And the key risk is, how does this get delivered? And all of this is going to take loads of time, but I would really urge caution in breaking these down into art form categories, which can be exclusive at this early time. And the last point is right at the very top, and obviously I'm going to say this, but I think digital culture, digital creativity needs to be woven in here as a cross-cutting element that everybody can engage with, whether that's site gallery, presenting artists who are using digital art forms, this Amaze Festival, which is, you know, kind of grassroots creativity. Everybody's engaged with these modes of working. So those would be my immediate points of feedback. And sorry for being the first question and being a man and all of that.
That's all right. We'll forgive you in time, John. Tom, do you want to come back on?
I think you're, can everybody hear me? Is that working? Yes. I think your point, John, around art forms is very well made. And looking at it now, I mean, it's amazing how when you're writing something like this, you miss those sorts of comparative kind of thoughts across the document, because it's a big old thing. And in some parts, we have reflected the cross-cultural, cross-sector strength that we know Sheffield has. I mean, it's well known that the sector blurs boundaries, and it's not siloed in many areas, although that could be improved. And then to have actions that are clearly so very siloed by art form now looks quite ridiculous, I must agree. So we will look at that, and I think the cross-sector idea and bringing digital into that should be part of that response. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, 100%. No, agree completely. Thank you.
I've got another, I've got two here that I'm going to go to next. So.
Hi, I'm Claudia from Arts Catalyst.
Hi.
Thanks for all your work and inviting us here today. I wanted to ask about what the Culture Forum was, because further on in the document, it sort of mentions it in the delivery plan, but I couldn't see any mention of it earlier on. It'd be great to know a bit more about that.
So this is all part of the collective leadership idea that is nascent, and we haven't pinned down exactly what it means yet. But the thought was that we need a new way of thinking about how this is actually delivered, the strategy, who gets involved, who can get involved, how those groups come together, how we build on existing networks and organizations, so we're not creating a big sort of bear moth that requires lots of funding, and the different models for approaching that. The forum is kind of a working title for that coming together, and you're right, it isn't explained in the document yet. In fact, I think the reference probably should have been taken out or explained, because there's more thinking to be done. But that's the working title for kind of how we're thinking about organizing the delivery of this. It's important to say that's not about kind of organizing the sector, because the sector knows how to do that already. It's more about how we focus on actually delivering these missions, and the delivery plan, how we organize maybe working groups, a bit like what seems to be happening at national level in government. They're creating sort of mission-focused task forces to look to deliver their policy kind of objectives. Can we do a similar sort of thing here, where different groups get involved for a time to deliver certain parts of this? So that's what the forum is, but it's not yet well defined. That conversation is ongoing.
Hi, my name's Finn. I'm from Andrew and Eve. We're a Sheffield-based queer arts organisation working across South Yorkshire. I'm just going to point out something that I don't think anyone's pointed out yet, which is that LGBTQ+ and queer arts is not mentioned in the document anywhere. So drag isn't mentioned, cabaret isn't mentioned, and the work we've been doing the last 8 years in the city hasn't been mentioned. And I just feel like if you're going to mention some stuff and name some things, you've got to mention other things. And I think some kind of like democratically sort of, I just can't believe that like there wasn't more things mentioned that are like maybe of the small scale in Sheffield, like in the actual document, because I feel like this gentleman said, if you sort of start saying and making examples of X, then Y feels left out, and we're just not going to pull people along at the very, like at any level of this. And the communities we work with, you know, they feel marginalized, they are not engaging with other culture. And I don't want this document to be something where like the highbrow culture, fine art, opera, classical, is maligned at the sake of what, like Joe already mentioned, folk art or cabaret. Drag and cabaret is a huge, really important art form for the UK. And unfortunately, because of American influences, our culture is becoming, in some sectors, diluted or taken away from the political roots that it pertains. And I suppose linked to that in this document, I feel like there's a lack of ambition around the social justice and the fight for equality that many of the organisations in Sheffield are working towards. So you can't really like just name anti-racist practice and that kind of fight for liberation if you don't mention the other struggles, particularly disability justice, and you know the fight we're currently facing against transphobia, because I feel like, you know, disability justice is completely linked at the moment to the COVID pandemic, and the people that aren't able to be in so many rooms right now, and because of the efforts like of there's new things popping up in Sheffield, like Breathe Easy Sheffield, who want to make spaces online, something we're really looking into, because, you know, our communities are getting more and more disabled and more sick. So I feel like there's a moment here to sort of recognize how digital can really engage with, and I think we should make space for that. So that's a lot of points there, but I hope that is coherent enough.
It's extremely helpful, and I agree. I think there's a bit of a disconnect. It's similar to what John was saying, actually. The kind of overarching aspiration does talk about, the creative missions do talk about how Sheffield is a social justice centre and fights for all of these sorts of things. But then when we get to the delivery plan and other parts of the document, there are bits that are missing, and like you say, some are mentioned and some are not. We obviously have a job to do, because this isn't going to be a cultural dictionary, so we can't have everything. But where there are, missions like what you describe, and it kind of becomes glaringly obvious when you describe it like that, we need to fill those gaps. And it might be that the delivery plan needs additional focuses around things like accessibility, LGBTQ+, or any other elements that we think are missing, to strengthen it and to connect it better to the creative missions, because there are connections, but it's maybe not comprehensive enough when we get to the nitty-gritty as well. But yeah, heard that loud and clear, and we'll focus on filling that gap. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that, that's absolutely why we're also here today. So thank you, and never apologize for bringing things up. That's why this has been a consultation process, and that we're really keen for this stage of the draft to go as far and wide, because I think, yeah, we're not going to, like, everyone who reads it's not going to pick up on each area, and there'll be areas that aren't mentioned now that we kind of want to feed in as well. And I think it's something that we're very aware of. So it's great to kind of have those conversations now and get it to a point where we all feel collectively kind of excited and engaged with this as a document and as a way forward. So yeah.
And just briefly referring to your point about disability justice, I think when we ran the online surveys, we were finding that I think the first survey, 35% of respondents self-elected to say they had a disability or a long-term health condition. And in the second survey, I think it was 26% as well, which are far above the sort of national averages. So again, it was something that we've identified that we need to explore this a little bit more. And yeah, we were aware again when we published this draft that we need to make recommendations around accessibility, at least from a very basic perspective, from sort of venues and for festivals who venue festivals, for example, like that. So that is absolutely something that we were working towards, and it is in our minds. And I think there are certain areas perhaps where we were starting to work on them. We thought, oh, this needs more care or more exploration, and we want to do more investigation in it before putting something in the strategy that we felt wouldn't be fully realised. So yeah, that is partly why some gaps are there. It's not that we haven't thought of them, it's that we think, oh, this needs much more kind of exploration and thought. But yeah, thank you, Finn. Great. Just pass you the mic. Yeah, you've got one.
I just wanted to pick up on your point that you said, rather than getting developing new behemoths of organisations, to exploit the ones that are already there. I mean, obviously I'm from Open Up Sheffield, but I'm also part of, local arts groups and local groups that have nothing to do with art, but who organise arts events, who haven't really kind of been part of your sector-wide communications and marketing. So I think that's perhaps one of the most important things, that those, because they're kind of like gateways to taking part in more formal ways to experience culture. But for most people, in our local area, going to their local art show, those small things, they're really important, but we just don't know so much about them, or they don't feel really included. So having not seen your audit, is that online, the audit? It is, okay. Well, I sit corrected. Sorry about that. I'll have a look at the audit and see how we go. Thank you.
Just very briefly responding to that, I think comms came up again and again in the engagement process as an area that needs work and development in Sheffield, and one that's a really big challenge for the sector. And when we were running the engagement process for this work, there's no pre-existing sort of general cultural or creative sector mailing list. There's a few individual mailing lists, like a Creative Opportunities one that Rebecca Maddox set up. But that was a key challenge for us establishing this work, was just spreading the word about invites. And we had to basically just create our own mailing list using an Excel spreadsheet and contacting multiple organizations and saying, could you platform names for this who you think should be involved in the process? But obviously, we're aware that there are massive gaps within that because you're building out from your own network. So, but yeah, we're aware that comms, is a recommendation in the report as well. So it's an area that's a challenge that needs more work.
Okay, I think 3 quick points, if I may. I thought one of the areas that was not addressed particularly well in the report was the area of audiences, and it almost goes back to one of the creative missions. There's a lot of talk about supporting organisations and supporting people to have careers in the creative sector, but there's not much discussion about audiences and how we as a city can build audiences for all the amazing creative activity that takes place. Quite often, externally, one of the ways we are looked at is do we get audiences for the activity that takes place in Sheffield? And I feel that is an area that could be strengthened. Second point was, I've made this point elsewhere, but I think film is slightly on the edge of what's been written into the report. There's a lot of talk about Sheffield not having the same level of investment from the Arts Council as other cities, but it doesn't say that Sheffield has higher investment from the British Film Institute than other cities, that kind of thing. And I think that there's quite a lot of investment comes into the city for film, and I think that could be woven into the fabric of the report in a better way. And then just quickly, the third point is that in reading the report, it felt strangely passive in its approach. It didn't seem to have an urgency about driving forward new activity for the city. Other people have made points this morning about gap filling and how that will be addressed. There are art forms that are not well covered in the city. But I felt we should maybe think a little bit about how we can respond to opportunities in a better way and bring new activity to the city. And that felt like it was not a strong element of the report. So yeah, thanks.
I think just briefly on the last point, because that's something that's quite interesting. I think that getting the tone of this right is something we've been grappling with, because I think we need to be both ambitious and recognize that there's a huge moment of opportunity now that Sheffield is in a time and a place to grab more, but at the same time be recognizing the realities that a lot of artists and organizations in the sector are facing, which have been very, very tough for the last few years. And kind of the balance of getting that right so that it doesn't seem like it's in the clouds, as it were, as a strategy, something that's doesn't reflect an individual's experience on the ground, whilst also being exciting, is something we've been trying to do. But I think we're ready to take more feedback on that. If we feel like it should be more ambitious, then great, we can turbocharge it more. It's that balance has been a really, really tricky one, because a lot of the messages we've had through the engagement have been at times very difficult to hear. Organizations really, really struggling to just survive, let alone do more, grow, and kind of build things. So I think that's probably where that's come from. The tone that you're seeing is trying to do two things, trying to face in two directions, and there's a tension there that maybe is not fully resolved. But very happy to kind of hear more feedback on that if we think it should go more in one direction.
I'm just going to ask if we can take 3 comments at a time, just try and make sure there are as many voices heard in the room, and we'll maybe keep our responses relatively brief, just to make sure there's as many voices in the room as possible. So could you raise your hand for next questions, points, please? Yes, Linda, do you want to go next, and then we'll keep going around?
I'll keep it short. I still think there's a bit of a focus where the kind of boldness and ambition focus is still sitting in the very kind of established and larger scale organisations, and the responsibility for access and inclusivity is still sitting in the creative health and smaller and DIY organisation within the report. And it feels like there's maybe a missed opportunity to talk about the boldness and ambition of the DIY and smaller and community connected organisations, and the responsibility for access and inclusivity in the larger organisations. I think that we've kind of leaned into what is actually a kind of a national problem in the arts of that expectation. And actually we should be subverting that, I think, as a city, because we are in our work. The other thing just to mention on access is, and I assume this is all going to happen, but just thinking about when we're looking at making kind of the shorter versions of this, to ensure that there are different ways to access that through easy read and through whether any of it needs to be in different languages or other things, and just making sure that we're considering that for the strategy. Final thing just to mention is just the strength of language around, in particular, the skills gap and the kind of traineeships and skilling up young people, but also in general, we're having a real kind of crisis of skills gap in this city in lots of different areas. So the strength of language that is sort of missing at the moment for me, where it's saying kind of sharing opportunities, or it is quite passive. And I think actually we need to make some really strong commitments there about kind of specific numbers or things we're going to hit about making sure that we address that in order to achieve everything else in this plan.
Thank you, Linda. That's really useful. Thank you. Take another few points and questions, please.
Did you still want to ask the question or comment?
No, it's going to build on what Linda was saying, because that was what I was going to say earlier. But the inclusivity throughout this report is very, very passive, and it should be your key driver, just building on what Linda said. So lead with that, strengthening the language for inclusivity, and also lean into the, like you said, the DIY organisations, because they're the innovators. It's great to have the statutory bodies, etc., on board, but that's not where the creativity happens. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Maxine. Yeah, keep everyone put their hands up, and we'll try and roll with Teresa as you're there, and then we'll go around. Okay, thank you. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Teresa from Welcoming Cultures. Well, I'm quite grateful that I was involved for the past few months in the steering group. So we've managed to, you know, share people's voices that we work with, but also our lived experience. I think going back to some of the key cultural programs that, you know, are currently running in the city by small organizations or by individuals like me, we want to see more recognition in the strategy, and it's needed because we have changed the lives of thousands of people in institutions and policies. And some of those ones that I'm going to mention are Migration Matters. What it's doing for the city should definitely be included in the strategy. Welcoming Cultures as well, what we're doing. DocFest is mentioned. Festival of Debate as well should be somehow linked to culture, because it's a debate about what people feel when it comes to race, culture, belonging, and our future ambitions. And what happened this year at Festival of Debate, again, it was about shortages and everything, and shortage in culture, it's a huge thing, and safety. Yeah, we've mentioned underserved communities. Actually, that's why we've started to do the strategies to bring equity for the underserved communities in the city. And so to give that power to those communities who currently have a history of being, you know, invisible, who have their voices invisible, where their history is not visible in the cultural institutions, what we need to look at, Tom and Joe, is that to reframe this, the way that it looks very nice. And I'm a bit worried and scared, like sometimes things in my life are not always nice. So I need to be honest and say, where is the challenge? So the delivery plan and the summary, it just tells us basically that we need to rebuild the foundations for culture to thrive. And to do that, we need to meet people where they are at. Yesterday, we were at an event where we were talking about nurturing seeds of hopes and safety. So the challenge is, again, to look at the language that we're using and the best ways for us to rebuild the foundations for the culture to thrive.
Rita, sorry, can I just ask you to try and finish your points? And just
Yeah. It's the point is that we need to add more on recognizing the existing projects that are maybe that we give our lives to. Then two is the power of volunteering is not being mentioned a lot, and what happens when people are volunteering for culture. The safety, the fact that I want to see an educational awareness, cultural aspect in this culture that will link to policies to reframe their cultural and EDI policies. And there's a lot more that we can add, but these are some of the key points.
Great, thank you, Teresa. And obviously, we're welcoming feedback online, through email and through the online survey as well. We'll try and get through as many different points as quickly now as we can before having a short break. Thank you, Sonia.
I'll try to be brief. Can you hear me? Yes, good. So some of these points I think have already been mentioned. So I've read the document several times, and there's some great stuff in there. There is a lot of stuff. I think for somebody coming to it cold, you'd be scratching your head thinking, well, what's the problem? Are they just trying to get bigger? Do they want more culture? But of course, you can't have more culture unless there is a demand. And you and I have talked about the demand side and how the lens on this was very much driven by the supply side. But within any market, there is supply and demand. And so, you know, for me, somebody who's recently returned to Sheffield, I'm going now to a lot of events and I kind of see the same faces. And in some months, June was very busy. I mean, literally, you're running from one event to another, and then August is going to be very quiet, and then we'll get into September, October, and it gets busy again. And so for me, there's this thing around the cultural calendar and what the city chooses to focus on and how we bring new faces to those events. And I think that for me is where the challenge, we've talked a bit about accessibility, but also affordability, I think is an issue as well. And making sure that culture isn't just for the highbrow, but actually it's for everybody, and not just people who live in Sheffield, but those who also visit and work here as well. We mentioned on point 11 on that we talk about anti-racist city. I think that's a typo because actually it's 2025. We've just set up the Race Equality Partnership. I think that's a leftover from the Sheffield City Partnership. So I think there is going to be a bit of a tension there because culture was one of the strands that the Race Equality Commission looked at and identified some pretty sizable gaps. So there's a lot to do, and we're not going to get it done within 12 months. We've talked about the culture calendar. We've talked about the demand side. I think also we have 25 items on the delivery plan. My sense is not all of these have an equal priority. So I don't know how much money we've got in a pot and how we're going to fund this, or whether we've got any really sexy plans for raising funding, whether that's a hotel tax or doing something clever around planning, etc. But it would be great to get a sense of where we see the order of priority and what we, you know, what are the low-hanging fruit. The stuff I think we could do quite quickly. There's other stuff I think we're going to need to work with the private sector or get onto Keir Starmer's Christmas card list and get some more money.
Again, thank you so much for the hard work, and the listening exercise is much appreciated. My name is Laura. I'm a freelance artist and creative producer. And like a lot of my colleagues got really excited about the first half of the document. And then I think there's some beliefs that come through the delivery plan that I would love for us to interrogate in this kind of feedback process, especially around growth and acceleration. And I know that strategically we may want to align with some of the other strategies, and especially, you know, growth is something that is coming through the Labour manifesto, new government and all that. And at the same time, we've seen with the pandemic, really the need of slowing down and taking care and reconnecting and co-creating has come through as a need of the sector. So I'm just wondering, how are we going to square these two things? This led me to interrogate and question, who is the strategy for? Is it for the people of Sheffield? Is it for the creative sector? Is it for investors? And are we being honest of saying, look, there are opportunities, we need to repackage ourselves in a way that attracts the investment, so then we can do what we want to do. And then I think we have to be honest with that. And that's how At the moment, to me, the 4 areas in that order, that's how it reads. I would love to see this being flipped and start with strengthening the foundations and then letting actually the people that do the work with the audiences and with the people locally do what they do best, right? And my second point was that some of the things that are the most exciting to me is in how we achieve what we want to achieve. They're also really big choices. And this idea of collective leadership is really appealing and can be really innovative. The same goes with the creative policy pilot area. But I feel that those things are almost like kind of buried into the plans. And again, I wonder, is it a strategic choice to let the most kind of like some stuff that might be a bit outlandish to people investing or to other stakeholders, kind of like let them slip through the strategy and then focus on those? Or again, should we be bold and say, actually, we are going to innovate in how we make decisions and how maybe even we decide on the resources? Because I think one piece that is missing is, for me, if there is a collective decision making, does that collective decision making also has a say of how the resources are allocated? And there's stuff that have been brought to the city, like participatory budgeting. We had a workshop not long ago at the Festival of Debate. So there's really bold mechanisms that could be also part of the strategy to kind of make it bolder and braver. And I think there's a few things that other colleagues have mentioned already, but there's maybe a piece around innovation. And again, innovation takes time. So how can we innovate and square that kind of taking time to do that with this growth agenda that we live in? And then a last point around membership and membership organizations and the focus on some of the metrics being about organizations. I think I'm missing the people in the strategy. The freelancers, we know that 70% of the creative industry on a national level are made of freelancers, and a lot of us are here in Sheffield. So where are the people in that strategy? And growth being measured by the size and number of organizations, it could be problematic. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really good points. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're going to have to wrap up, unfortunately, just to move to our next section. Obviously, there are multiple ways for people to contribute further thoughts online, and we're about to go into breakout spaces as well. There'll be another opportunity to feedback. But Alexis, yeah.
I was already going to take a risk by speaking, and now I'm a man finishing off after a man started. Which for those people who don't know me, my name's Alexis Karachi. I'm here as a member of the Culture Collective board. I helped set up the Culture Collective, so I might be regarded as part of the problem. When I'm not involved in that, I'm also involved in the Chamber of Commerce. So I'm an audience member. I've been fortunate enough to provide a bit of funding for cultural activity over the years. I've got 4 points as a bit of an outsider, and it's constructive challenge to us all, is that I think a strategy document, its inherent challenge is making choices and picking things and listening to the conversation, which I think is really rich, and looking at the cultural audit. There's a real risk that we try and include everything everywhere all at once. And that means we maximize the number of people who are happy. But when it becomes to delivering the strategy, we end up really confused as a city. I don't have the solution to that, but it's just to acknowledge that some of this is going to involve being brave, and some of this is going to involve some people being perhaps not as happy as others, because the strategy is to pick. In terms of the disconnect that people have described, in that it goes from quite ambitious at the start to then making choices perhaps too quickly, I put to you a perspective solution, is that there may be a bridging section that talks about the principles that we will apply, the principles through which we will see the delivery of this strategy, and those principles being value-led, and that those principles therefore becoming a bit of a test. So if we find in the delivery of the strategy we're moving away from those principles, or we're not being true to those principles, that's a corrective action to bring us back to that which is important to us. So for example, about being inclusive, about creating safe spaces, about all manner of things that are important to us, such as social justice. And then last but not least, maybe one of the things, and again, like others, I've read it, is maybe the disconnect that some people have described in this room is because the front bit is very broad, and then the delivery plan is quite granular quite quickly. And that's hence why I'm suggesting we may look at a bridging function that talks about the values that we bring to this. But thank you for inviting me into this space.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you everyone for your thoughts and your energy and your feedback. And some of my colleagues have been noting all of the comments that have been made, so they will feed into our big feedback document for the next drafts. And please do submit additional information online or by email to us as well. We are going to have a quick break now. We are a little bit behind schedule because we wanted to create as much space, hear as many voices as we could then, so we might end up overrunning very slightly. But yeah, we'll have a 5 to 10 minute break now and then we'll come back. Cheers.